I betrayed the only family I had with the man who could have me killed. I was supposed to be holy, pure, untouchable. But beneath the veil, I was just a woman, starving for something real. He was my sister's husband. A man who lived by violence and ruled with fear. And still, I let him in. Not once. Not by accident. I chose him, and I paid for it. I broke my vow to God the night I broke my sister's heart with her husband. The shame never fades. It just changes form. Some days, it burns like fire in my chest. Other days, it's quiet, like a ghost sitting beside me while I pray. I wasn't always like this. I used to be good. Or at least I believed I was. My name is Eva, and for almost 20 years, I was Sister Maria Eva of St. Clement's Convent in upstate New York. A woman of silence, service, and sacred routine. I'd wake before the sun, tend the gardens, help the poor, and sleep with scripture under my pillow. I entered the convent when I was only 19. Most of the sisters said it was God's calling. For me, it was more like escaping the noise, the chaos of my family, the bitterness of my parents' divorce, the coldness of my older sister, Angela. Angela and I were never close. Even as kids, she wore armor, pretty, popular, but sharp-tongued and guarded. I always felt small next to her, like I was born into a shadow I couldn't escape. When I left for the convent, she didn't even say goodbye. For 15 years, I heard nothing from her. Not a single letter. Not even when our mother died. And then, out of nowhere, she appeared. One crisp autumn morning, I was helping Sister Agnes peel apples for the parish bake sale when the Mother Superior called me to the visitors' parlor. I'll never forget the smell, her perfume. Expensive, sharp, like orchids and ambition. Angela stood there in a designer coat, black sunglasses, and crimson lipstick. She looked like a magazine cover, wealthy, bold, untouchable. But it wasn't her appearance that made my heart stop. It was the man standing behind her. Tall. Dark. Eyes that seemed to see through walls. A presence that made the air feel thick. He introduced himself with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Dante Morelli," he said. "Your brother-in-law." I'd heard the name before. On the news. In whispers. A man tied to the Morelli family, a Mafia dynasty out of Chicago. Racketeering. Gun running. Disappearances. The kind of name that made people change the subject. Angela linked her arm in his like a trophy. "We're in town for business," she said casually. "Thought I'd visit my baby sister, the nun." That word, nun, tasted different coming from her lips. Like mockery wrapped in affection. But I smiled anyway. Because beneath her polished cruelty, I still craved her approval. We sat together for 20 minutes. Talked about nothing. Her shopping. His business ventures. They asked about the convent. About my simple life. And all the while, Dante's eyes never left mine. Not in a flirtatious way, but in a piercing, unreadable way. Like he saw something I didn't even know was there. When they left, I felt a strange emptiness in the parlor. As if something had been taken. Or perhaps, something had been awakened. I returned to my duties. But that night, during prayers, I couldn't stop thinking of him. Of his voice. His gaze. And worse, how it made me feel. Like I wasn't just Sister Maria Eva, but Eva. A woman. Flesh. Wanting. I didn't ask for what came next. I didn't pray for it. But deep down, I stopped resisting the moment he said my name. Before Angela and Dante showed up at the convent gates, my life was quiet, achingly quiet. Most people think silence is peaceful. But when you live in it long enough, it can start to feel like a cage made of stillness. That was my world. At St. Clement's, time didn't pass in days or months, but in rosaries, garden seasons, and Sunday hymns. The outside world felt like a distant dream. My body belonged to God. My emotions? Suppressed. My past? Sealed behind sacred doors. I wasn't unhappy, not exactly. There was a rhythm to it all. Morning prayer at 5. Chores at 6. Mass at 7. I worked in the greenhouse, where my hands were always covered in soil, not sin. And yet, there was always a hum beneath my skin. A low ache. Something I couldn't name. Sometimes at night, I'd sit alone in the chapel, staring at the candlelight flickering across the crucifix. I'd ask myself, is this really what God wants for me? Or is it what I wanted for myself, because I didn't know how to be anything else? I was good at hiding questions like that. I'd practiced silence my whole life. Even as a girl, I learned not to speak when Angela was around. She took all the air in the room. And when our father left us for a younger woman, I swallowed my pain like communion wine and told myself to be strong. Angela never looked back. She moved out at 17, chasing wealth like it was oxygen. Meanwhile, I chose the cloister. Maybe I wanted to punish myself. Or maybe I thought God would love me more if I disappeared into his service. 15 years later, I was still invisible, until the day my sister walked in wearing diamonds and sin. She didn't ask me about my life. She didn't seem curious about the path I had chosen. She looked around the convent like it was a museum. Still smells like wax and guilt, she muttered under her breath when no one else could hear. Dante, though, he was different. Quiet. Observant. I noticed how he watched everything, the old wooden floors, the stained glass windows, even the sisters shuffling past us in their habits. He asked about our community outreach. Our soup kitchens. Our vow of poverty. And he asked me questions. About my childhood. My memories of Angela. Whether I ever missed the outside world. No, I lied. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, hearing Angela's laughter echo through my head. But more than that, I saw his eyes. Not just their color, but the way they held a question I hadn't dared to ask myself in years. Do you still feel? Something inside me shifted that day. Not dramatically. Not violently. More like a crack in the stone, small, but enough to let something dangerous seep in. And that something had a name. Dante. The second time I saw him, he came alone. It had only been 3 days since their first visit, and I was out in the garden, pruning the rosemary bushes, trying to lose myself in the scent and routine. The sun was warm, the air still, and my thoughts restless. When I heard footsteps on the gravel path, I turned, expecting one of the sisters. It was Dante. No suit this time. No designer coat. Just a dark wool sweater, jeans, and a coat slung over his shoulder. He looked softer, but no less dangerous. Eva, he said. Not sister. Just Eva, the name I hadn't heard spoken like that in years. It was like he knew something sacred had been stripped, and he didn't care. I stood slowly, the shears trembling in my gloved hands. You shouldn't be here, I said. But even as I spoke the words, I wasn't sure if they were meant for him or for myself. He shrugged slightly, as if that small act of defiance meant nothing to him. Angela had meetings, he said. I thought I'd see how you spend your days, outside the walls. I wanted to run. Or scream. or fall to my knees and pray until the thoughts stopped. But instead, I led him through the garden like it was the most natural thing in the world. We walked in silence. He touched the rosemary, sniffed the lavender. I could feel his gaze moving from the plants to me, measuring something I couldn't name. "You used to sing," he said suddenly. "Angela told me. Said you had the voice of a ghost." It startled me. That memory. The fact that Angela had ever said anything soft about me. "I don't sing anymore." "Why not?" "Because silence is safer." He stopped walking then. Turned to face me. "You don't look like a woman who chose silence. You look like a woman who was forced into it." I froze. My throat closed up. I hated how quickly he saw through me. How easily he touched a part of me no one had dared touch. Not even God. He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. His fingers barely grazed my skin, but it felt like lightning. I backed away, heart pounding, heat rising in my chest like shame. "You should go," I whispered. He didn't argue. Just nodded, hands in his pockets. "Tell her I said hello," he added, before disappearing through the archway. I didn't sleep that night either. Or the night after. Angela came again 2 days later, laughing, loud, and distracted. She mentioned nothing about Dante's visit. Either she didn't know, or she didn't care. We had tea in the convent kitchen. She talked about Milan, Paris, and people with names I'd never heard. She wore a new ring, emerald, enormous, almost vulgar. She said he'd given it to her after making some problems disappear. "Money isn't romantic," she said. "But power? That's something else." I tried not to listen. I tried not to compare her life of silk and secrets to my own, of habits and hidden prayers. But something had already broken loose inside me. That night, I stood in front of the mirror in my cell. Removed my veil. Let my hair fall down for the first time in years. And I looked at myself, not as a servant of God, but as a woman. A woman who had felt the weight of a man's gaze and hadn't turned to stone. I hated myself for wanting more. And yet, I waited. I waited for his footsteps again. He came back the next week. This time, I didn't pretend to be surprised. I was in the chapel, lighting candles for the souls of the forgotten, when I felt it, that shift in the air. Like the presence of something unholy cloaked in warmth. When I turned, he was standing by the door, eyes lowered respectfully, but his presence filled the room like thunder. "Is this a bad time?" he asked. It always was. I didn't answer. Just finished the last candle and placed the matchstick down with trembling fingers. "I was nearby," he continued, stepping closer. "Angela's at some fashion thing in Manhattan. I thought he paused, then offered a crooked smile. I'm not sure what I thought. You draw me in, sister." He said sister this time. But it sounded like a dare. "I'm not your confessor, Mr. Morelli," I said quietly. "No," he replied, "but you look like salvation." My knees almost buckled. Not from his words, but from the ache they unlocked. No one had ever spoken to me like that. Not in my whole life. Not even before I took the veil. I had no training for this kind of danger. And yet, I didn't ask him to leave. We sat in the pews for over an hour. He told me about growing up with violence. About watching men get buried for debts. About the moment he realized fear was a form of power, and how he'd learned to speak it fluently. "I don't believe in God," he said at one point, his voice low. "But I believe in consequences." There was a wound in him, hidden beneath charm and steel. And I recognized it. Because I carried one too. Mine just looked more like silence and prayer. When the church bells rang for vespers, I stood up, expecting him to go. But instead, he looked up at me and asked, "Do you ever miss being touched?" The world stopped. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He stood, walked toward the door, then turned and said, "You don't have to lie to me, Eva." That night, I locked my door and wept. I knelt on the cold stone floor and begged for strength. I opened scripture, desperate for guidance, but every word blurred before my eyes. Desire is not a sin. But giving it power over you, that's where the fall begins. I told myself I would avoid him. That I'd confess my weakness and reclaim my vows with more fervor. But the truth was, I didn't want to forget the way he looked at me. Like I was more than cloth and sacrifice. Like I was still alive. The following week, he returned again. Brought books. Asked about my favorite author. Said he wanted to understand what calms someone like you. And little by little, I let the visits happen. I told no one. We never touched. Not then. But each conversation was like a thread, pulling me away from the altar and towards something darker, warmer, real. Angela never returned with him. She was always busy or traveling. She texted me once, saying, "Dante said you've been good company while I'm gone. I knew you'd be useful eventually." Useful. That word rattled in my mind for days. I wasn't useful. I was breaking. And the man holding the pieces belonged to her. It was raining the night I let go of everything I believed in. The convent was quiet, the sisters asleep, the sound of the storm tapping like 1,000 fingers against the stained glass windows. I had just finished evening prayers, but the words tasted empty in my mouth. I knelt in my cell long after the others had gone to bed, whispering a litany I no longer felt worthy to speak. And then I heard it, the knock. 3 soft taps. Not the iron gate. Not the front door. My window. I opened it in disbelief. And there he was. Dante. Standing in the rain, soaked, shivering slightly, like a man who didn't care if he caught fire or drowned. "What are you doing here?" I hissed, terrified someone would hear. "I needed to see you. You can't just." "I saw Angela today," he interrupted. "She said you used to sing when you were little. That you'd stop the whole house just with a lullaby." I felt the air shift. That old wound. That old need. "I haven't sung in years," I whispered. "You should. You have that kind of sadness that needs sound." I stared at him. At the water dripping down his jaw. At the hunger in his eyes, not just desire, but something more frightening. Like he was as lost as I was. "I can't let you in." He didn't move. Just looked at me and said, "Then come out." Like Eve with the apple, I stepped outside. We met under the cloister's archway, out of the rain but still soaked by everything we couldn't say. He reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away. His fingers were warm, trembling. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked. "I believe in weakness." "Then I'm your proof." And with that, he kissed me. It wasn't soft. It wasn't holy. It was a confession in itself, of every silent night, every buried need, every crack in the armor I'd built for 2 decades. I should have run. Should have pushed him away and begged for God's mercy. Instead, I kissed him back. The stone beneath my feet felt like air. His hands were at my waist, my back, my neck, urgent, searching. And mine were desperate too. Not for sex. Not even for him. But for the feeling of being seen. Of being wanted. Of being a woman again. I don't know how long we were lost in that storm of sin. Minutes? A lifetime? When it ended, I stepped back, breathless, terrified, awakened. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure to whom, him, myself, or the God I had just betrayed. "I'm not," he said. Then he left, disappearing into the rain as if he'd never been there. I stood there alone, soaked, shaking, burning. My lips still tingled with the taste of him. My heart cracked under the weight of what I'd done. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't pray. I lay in my bed with my fingers pressed to my mouth, and all I could think was, I can't take it back. I stopped looking at myself in mirrors after that night. Something in my reflection had changed. My eyes looked hungrier. My skin flushed too easily. My habit felt tighter, more suffocating, like it no longer fit the woman wearing it. And worst of all, I couldn't stop remembering how he felt. How I felt, alive, shaken, wanted. I told no one. Not Sister Agnes, not the Mother Superior, not even in confession. I was terrified that speaking it out loud would make it real, and once real, unforgivable. So I carried it like a tumor inside my soul, pulsing, poisonous, hidden beneath layers of good deeds and holy silence. I fasted. I volunteered for extra chores. I scrubbed the stone floors of the chapel until my knees bled. I tried to bargain with guilt the way I once bargained with God, with sacrifice. But no prayer drowned out his name. No rosary erased the taste of his mouth. Angela called me one afternoon, completely unaware. She was in Paris now, said Dante had stayed behind in New York to handle some things. She was all charm and indifference, gloating about a new club they were opening downtown. "You know," she laughed, "for a nun, you're surprisingly good company. Dante says you've got a strange way of looking at the world. Like you see things other people miss." She had no idea what he saw in me. Neither did I. Days passed. Then weeks. He didn't come back. And the silence drove me mad. I began to think I had imagined it. That maybe it was all some feverish dream conjured by loneliness and unmet longing. Until one afternoon, I found a note tucked between the pages of a donated book in the convent library. No name. Just 3 words, I still remember. I nearly dropped it. I clutched that scrap of paper in my hands like it was scripture. Read it over and over until the ink smudged from the tears I didn't know were falling. That night, I stood in the chapel and tried to sing again. Just a single note, soft and cracked, rising from my throat like a ghost. But it hurt. It didn't sound like me. Because I didn't know who I was anymore. I was a nun. A woman of God. But I was also Eva, the girl who had once kissed her sister's husband in the dark, in the rain, and liked it. The guilt wasn't just spiritual. It was flesh deep. Every glance I exchanged with the sisters felt like a betrayal. Every sermon about loyalty and sin made me feel smaller. But still, I waited for him. Not proudly. Not even hopefully. But I waited. Until one evening, I returned to my cell and found a small envelope on my pillow. Inside, a silver cross necklace. Simple, elegant, and unmistakably expensive. Beneath it, a note written in his bold, slanted hand. "If you can't wear it where they can see, wear it where only you can feel it." I collapsed onto the bed, the necklace pressed to my chest, and sobbed like a child. Because I knew. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. It started with a question. Angela called unexpectedly, her voice sharp, clipped, like the edge of a broken wine glass. "Eva," she said, "has Dante been coming to see you?" My breath caught. It was the first time she'd asked directly. No teasing. No sarcasm. Just a blunt, dangerous curiosity. I lied. No. Not since that day you both visited. There was a long pause. I could hear her lighting a cigarette. She always smoked when she was nervous. Strange. He mentioned something about the convent yesterday. Said it smelled like rosemary and sin. I swallowed hard. That could mean anything, I offered weakly. Angela laughed, but it wasn't light-hearted. "You're still a terrible liar, Eva. Always were." The call ended with a warning dressed as sisterly concern. "Be careful, little saint. You think you're different from the rest of us, but you're not. And if you hurt me, I won't forgive you. Ever." I sat in my cell after that, trembling. I'd always feared disappointing her, but now I feared her anger. Angela didn't get mad, she got even. And she had a husband who made people disappear for far less than betrayal. A week later, Dante came again, not to the convent, but to the outskirts of town. He sent a note through one of the local volunteers at our food pantry. It simply said, "Meet me where the trees remember." It was our code. A small grove just past the cemetery, where we once sat in silence while he read from a book of poetry he claimed he didn't understand. I went. Of course I did. He was already there, leaning against a tree, cigarette in hand, wearing a dark coat that made him look like a shadow with eyes. "I think she knows," I said. He didn't flinch. Just nodded. "She's not stupid. But she's also not innocent." "What does that mean?" He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something behind the charm. Something harder. Colder. "Angela's done worse to me than you can imagine. We're not a love story, Eva. We're a transaction. You're the first thing that's felt pure." I should have felt flattered. Instead, I felt sick. "I'm not pure," I whispered. He stepped closer. "You were. Before me." Those words cut deeper than any scripture. He cupped my face, gently, as if I might shatter. "Do you regret it?" "Yes," I said. And then, no. Both were true. He kissed me again. Softly, this time. Almost reverently. But there was a desperation in it, like he knew time was running out. When we parted, he said, "If she comes for you, let me handle it. I don't want violence. You don't get to choose. Not in my world." It was the first time he said it so plainly, my world. And I wasn't ready for it. Later that week, Mother Superior summoned me. "Eva," she said, eyes searching mine, "is there something you'd like to confess?" I froze. Had someone seen us? Had Angela spoken? But I shook my head. "No, Reverend Mother." She stared a moment longer, then nodded. "Very well. But remember, the soul cannot be healed in silence." I left her office drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like war drums. The net was tightening. My lies, my longing, my betrayal, they weren't invisible anymore. And somewhere beneath it all, I began to fear not only for my soul, but for my life. I stood at the altar, hands folded, eyes lifted toward a crucified silence. I had prayed for clarity. For strength. For the impossible. But God wasn't speaking anymore. There comes a moment when every secret stops being quiet, when the weight of hiding becomes louder than the act itself. I had reached that moment. I could feel it in the way Sister Agnes looked at me, her eyes too kind. I could feel it in the way the other nuns stopped inviting me to morning rosary. And I could feel it in the calls I wasn't returning from Angela. I'd betrayed her. My own blood. And I knew, if I didn't act soon, this wouldn't end with a confession. It would end with a body. One morning, I left the convent before dawn. I took off my veil, put on plain clothes, and walked into a world I no longer recognized. My steps led me to Dante's apartment, a towering penthouse over the East River, guarded by men with cold eyes and concealed weapons. They let me through. When he saw me, something flickered in his expression: surprise, concern, and something else, relief. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I don't know why I'm here," I admitted. He poured me tea. Sat beside me on a couch far too expensive for a man who claimed to have no soul. "Angela's furious," he said simply. "She's planning something." I nodded. "Then we need to stop." His body went still. "Stop, what?" "This," I whispered. "Us." The silence that followed was thick, charged, painful. "You still love her," I said. "Don't you?" He didn't answer. I turned to him. "You told me I was the only real thing you had. But real doesn't mean right, Dante. And I can't survive in your world. I was never meant to." His jaw clenched. "You think I'll let you walk away?" "I think you'll let me live." That was the real fear. Not heartbreak. Not shame. But the unspoken threat that love, in the wrong hands, could become a weapon. He stood, pacing. "You want to go back to praying in silence? To hiding behind stained glass?" "I want to breathe again." He moved toward me, took my hand. "I would burn it all down for you, Eva. I don't want ashes." For a moment, I saw the boy he once was, broken, starved, reaching. Then I saw the man he'd become, dangerous, powerful, unforgiving. And I knew what I had to do. That night, I returned to the convent. Packed my few belongings. Left a letter on my pillow. And disappeared into the darkness before anyone could stop me. I didn't go far. Just enough. Enough to be unknown. Enough to be safe. And as I rode the bus into the countryside, wind whispering through cracked windows, I looked down at the necklace he gave me, still pressed against my chest. I didn't take it off. But I buried it in the pocket of my coat, where no one could see. Because some sins are too beautiful to destroy. The day the truth surfaced, it didn't explode. It bled. Like a wound torn open slowly, painfully, without mercy. I was gone from the convent for 12 days. I'd found shelter in a small town 2 hours north, in a rented room above a flower shop owned by an old widow who didn't ask questions. I helped her arrange lilies in the mornings, cleaned her kitchen, and spent long hours sitting by the window, staring at the hills that looked nothing like the world I'd left behind. But guilt doesn't vanish with distance. It mutates. It waits. And then, it finds you. I was arranging roses when I heard the bell above the shop door. I turned, expecting a customer. It was Angela. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there, dressed in all black, sunglasses hiding her eyes, as if she were already mourning something. Or someone. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She took off the glasses. Her eyes were red, but dry. "You weren't hard to trace. You've never been good at disappearing." I wanted to run. I wanted to fall at her feet and beg for her forgiveness. But I stood still, frozen in shame. Why? She asked. 2 syllables. That was all. I don't know, I said. I was lonely. He saw me. Her laugh was bitter. We were sisters. I know. You were supposed to be untouchable. Holy. I know. She stepped closer, her voice shaking now. I gave up everything to protect you. Did you know that? When Mom died, I was the one who paid for her funeral. I paid your medical bills when you got sick in your 2nd year. I told Dad to stay away from you when he came back. I let you hate me because I thought it would keep you safe. I felt my knees buckle. Angela. And then you took him, she said, her voice flat. You took the only thing that was mine. Tears blurred my vision. He was never yours, not really. She slapped me. Not hard. But enough. Enough to break the dam inside me. I dropped to my knees, sobbing, grabbing the edge of the counter for balance. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She looked down at me, disgust and heartbreak tangled in her eyes. You want my forgiveness? It doesn't come cheap. She turned and walked out, leaving a single red rose on the counter. I never saw her again. Later that evening, I received a letter from the convent. It was not a request. It was a dismissal. With deep sorrow, we must sever your vows due to moral failure unbecoming of your role. There was no hearing. No second chance. I was no longer Sister Maria Eva. I was just Eva. A woman with no home. No family. No God. And when I opened the drawer that night and held the silver cross Dante had given me, I didn't cry. I simply placed it back in the box. Because for the first time in my life, I knew what it felt like to lose everything. After Angela left and the convent dismissed me, I didn't go back to the city. I didn't answer Dante's messages. I didn't even check the news, though I knew there'd be whispers. In his world, betrayal didn't vanish. It multiplied. It waited. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was empty. The woman who once prayed until her knees bled had nothing left to say. No more words to offer heaven. No more confessions. Just silence, the kind that doesn't comfort, but haunts. I stayed in that little town by the hills. Got a job cleaning rooms at a roadside inn. It was quiet work. No one knew who I was. I became just another face in a place that didn't care where I came from or what I'd done. Every morning, I'd scrub floors, change sheets, and watch people come and go, families, travelers, lovers. And I wondered, do they carry guilt, too? Do they look at each other and see the damage they've left behind? One night, I sat alone on the porch behind the inn, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the crickets sing the songs I used to offer in church. And I whispered, not a prayer, but a truth. I don't know who I am anymore. And for the first time in months, the silence didn't answer back with shame. Just space. Stillness. A kind of grace that doesn't judge, but waits. I started keeping a journal. I wrote everything. Every kiss. Every lie. Every moment of weakness. I wrote letters to Angela I never sent. I wrote psalms that didn't exist. I wrote my name again and again until it stopped feeling like a sentence. Eva. Just Eva. No titles. No vows. No borrowed guilt. One afternoon, the widow from the flower shop visited me. She brought lavender and a box of old photographs. "You look like my daughter," she said. She left the church too. Said she needed to feel the world with her own hands. I asked what happened to her. She never came back. But she sent flowers. That night, I pressed the dried lavender between the pages of my journal. I wrote a letter to God, not asking for forgiveness, but for clarity. If love led me here, was it still a sin? There was no answer. But the stars were bright that night. And I allowed myself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't fallen. Maybe I had simply stepped out of someone else's story and into my own. It took me 6 months to find the courage. 6 months of silence, labor, and nights writing unsent letters. And then one morning, I woke with a need I couldn't explain, not for forgiveness, but for truth. I needed to tell her. Not because it would fix anything, but because I couldn't carry it anymore alone. I took the bus to the city. The same streets that once felt like a different universe now felt foreign again, colder, sharper, full of memories that pulsed beneath every streetlight. Angela still lived in the penthouse. Of course she did. But when I buzzed her apartment, there was no answer. I waited in the lobby for 3 hours. Then I saw her. Dressed in black, always black, sunglasses over her eyes, though it wasn't sunny. She walked like a woman who didn't care what the world thought of her, but when her eyes met mine, she stopped. Just for a second. She didn't turn around. Didn't flee. She walked past me and whispered, "You have 5 minutes." Upstairs, the place hadn't changed. Cold, immaculate, like a museum. A prison made of money. I didn't sit. I couldn't. I came to say the truth, I told her. Not to make excuses. Just to tell you all of it. And I did. I told her about the first time he came alone. About the garden. The chapel. The kiss. The necklace. The silence after. I told her about the hunger I didn't know I still had. About how I hated her and loved her. About how much I had wanted to be seen. She didn't speak once. Only when I said, "I never meant to destroy you," did she finally lift her head. "You didn't destroy me," she said quietly. "You reminded me that love doesn't make people better. It just shows who they already are." Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even bitter. It was tired. "I married Dante because he made me feel untouchable," she continued. Powerful. But in the end, I wasn't either. And neither were you. Tears came to my eyes. "I miss you," I whispered. She stood. Walked to the window. "I miss what we could have been. Not what we were." Then she turned. And in her eyes, for the first time since we were children, I saw something like grief. "You came here to be forgiven," she said. "But I can't give that to you." "I didn't come for forgiveness," I replied. "I came to free myself from the lie." She nodded. "Then go. And live like someone who survived." As I reached the door, she added, "Don't come back. But don't disappear either. I'll know if you do." I walked away with shaking hands, my chest hollow and full at the same time. It wasn't closure. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was real. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. I never saw Dante again. He called once, just once, a few weeks after I left Angela's apartment. His voice was softer, slower, like someone already living a few seconds ahead of heartbreak. "I never meant to ruin you," he said. "You didn't," I replied. You just revealed what was already cracked. There was a long pause. Then, almost like a confession, he said, I loved you, Eva. And I answered honestly, I believe you. That was the last time we spoke. No grand farewell. No final kiss. Just a voice across a wire and the quiet that followed. I moved again. Farther this time. A town by the coast, where the sea sounds like a lullaby and no one knows how to pronounce my last name. I rent a small room above a cafe. I teach piano lessons to children. I grow rosemary in a pot on the windowsill, because sometimes even the scent of something sacred can feel like home. I don't wear the habit anymore. But I still pray. Not the old way. Not with guilt or desperation. I pray like someone talking to a memory, to the girl I once was, to the woman I became, to the sister I lost. Some nights, I light a candle and place the silver cross beside it. I don't wear it. But I haven't thrown it away either. It reminds me that love, real love, doesn't always come with purity. Sometimes it arrives soaked in betrayal, desire, and ruin. And yet, it's still love. People think sin is a moment. A kiss. A choice. But sin, I've learned, is silence. The kind that grows between sisters. The kind that lets loneliness fester until it becomes need. I don't expect forgiveness. Not from Angela. Not from God. But I forgive myself. Because I was more than a nun. More than a sinner. I was a woman. With a body. A soul. A longing. And now, I am a story. One I'm no longer afraid to tell. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Sometimes, sharing a story is the only way to survive it. If this touched something in you, I hope you'll stay for the next one.